Let's see.
Right on. Later.
So you guys should be able to have access to that. But yeah, thanks for coming. This is going to be a review today of basically the things that you guys have been going over for the last couple days. I want to focus mainly on the React front-end JavaScript side of things as opposed to the Ruby and Rails side of things. So let me go ahead and just share my screen really quick. Do you guys see my VS Code? And do you see this to-do list over here? Okay, cool. So let me just pump up this size. There we go. What's this? And I'm just moving my menus around. Put that over there. Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, so basically what I have set up here is I have a Ruby on Rails backend all ready to roll. I have my controllers and my models, my database already created. So let's just look really quick at my controller. So I have this controller here. So you can see it's called tasks. So I am going to be doing kind of a basic to-do list sort of app today. And we're going to be doing all of the CRUD actions on those. Hopefully we can get through them all before about 5:15 when we have to go back to the main room. But as you can see here in this controller, we've got our app method, which is used to render our app on the actual browser. We have our index method, which will show us all of our tasks. We have our show method, which will show us one individual task. We're not actually going to be using this one today. And I don't know if you guys have gone over that one yet, but this is definitely one that you'll be using in the future if you haven't gotten to it already. Create, which allows us to create a new task. Update, which obviously is like an edit function, and then destroy. So let's just go ahead and just jump into this. So as our app, I'm going to go ahead and just turn on my server really quick. It might already be, no, it's not on. And just make sure it runs. Make sure nothing's breaking right off the bat. So I'm going to be trying to do as much testing as I go in pretty quick iterations to kind of model the best way. Okay, so we have a little bug. This is like the worst bug. So let me just look at this really quick. So, all right. Attacking JavaScript application. Okay, so I think that this is showing up because I haven't filled out anything in my app.js. So let's just start from the ground and we'll work our way up. So we're going to start off our app.js. And by the way, as I'm going through this, I'm just going to be kind of talking out loud, kind of explaining as I'm going. If at any point any of you are like, whoa, hold on, stop. I don't know how you jump from A to B. I don't know how this and that are connecting. I don't know why you decided to do X. Please just like unmute yourself, speak up, let me know, and I can stop and I can explain that. So at any moment, just let me know. But otherwise, I'm just going to kind of go through as kind of methodically as I can. Okay, so to start out, we're going to import React. From React, one of the first things that we always do. I'm also going to go ahead and import Axios because I know I'm going to be using that. I've already installed it through Yarn, so we should be good to go. I'm going to set up this component here as a functional component. So there's our basic template right there. The ends of our components usually always end in a return. I always like to just add a return there, throw in a div, maybe an H1, and just to show some text. So we'll just call this our to-do list app. And then we want to remember to always export default app. So looking at this, we should be able to at least see this to-do list show up inside of our page. So I'm going to save this, make sure my server's running, look good. So let's refresh this and see if this pulls up. All right, cool. So there we go. So we know that this is working just like it should, which is great. So we're going to drop that down. Cool. All right. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to be able to get all of our tasks. So if we look here, I have already seeded my database with 3 tasks that I've created. And our tasks have 2 attributes. They have a name and a due date. And I've already run Rails DB seed, so these are already in the database. So what we want to do is we want to be able to just grab those inside of this app. So I think a good way to do that would be to, I think I've seen this in your guys' homework where you guys have been adding like some buttons that allow you to click them and kind of like you basically run a function like get books or get items or whatever, and it then displays all that. So let's go ahead and do that. You can also use something like use effect, which will kind of cause you to get all of those items or all that data when the page loads, but we're not going to worry about that too much right now. We're just going to worry about mainly just the function. So we're going to add a button here. We'll give it an on click, and we want it to run a function that we're going to call get task, and we'll throw that right in there. And then we want to show this, have this button say like show me my to do task, and then we'll close out our button. Cool. So on click equals, there we go. Sweet. So let's save that. I think this will probably throw an error because I haven't defined that. So I'm almost positive that it will, which is fine, but it's good to see those errors anyways. Great. Okay. So yeah, so there, that's a really helpful error. It says reference error, get tasks is not defined. So you go over here, we have this button that we're wanting to run a function called get tasks whenever we click it, but we haven't defined that function anywhere. So let's go ahead and define that function right now. So we're going to go ahead and go, and up here at the very top, do a const, we'll do get tasks equals, and we're going to make this an async function. Cool. And I like to use try catch blocks within my async await functions, but you can also use .then and .catch. There's different ways you can do that, but we'll go ahead and just do a try catch block. So we're going to do, actually, just to make sure that this is working, I'm just going to do console.log get task clicked. And let's just run this, and let's just make sure that it's pulling in our button. So this is one thing I like to do whenever I like create a button and it's running a function. Before I get too deep into that function, I like to just kind of throw in a console log and do some quick tests. So we'll click this, and yeah, so you can see it expected on click listener to be a function instead of got a value of object type. That's an okay error. It does show that we are doing kind of what it says. Oh, actually, no, sorry. So there is an error here. I don't know if James has gone over this with you guys. I'm sure he has, but whenever you have a button or some kind of a JSX or HTML element or function, run a function, you have to actually make it be an anonymous function. And so anonymous function is basically an empty function, like sort of like template, and then it returns the function that you want it to run. What this does is, you might have noticed that when I refresh the page, before I actually click this button, it already said get tasks clicked before I actually click this. That's because if you don't have this anonymous function here, it will make this function that you want it to run automatically as soon as the page loads. So in order to prevent that sort of like default behavior, you always have to put this anonymous function here and then make it return the function that you want. So let's save that. We'll return this again, or we'll refresh this and see what comes up. Perfect. Okay, nothing. Now we hit that, and great. We're getting get tasks clicked. So we can keep clicking that, and there we go. So that's why we got that error. So we've added our anonymous function. We're good to go. So we know that get tasks is working, and we know that our button is working. So now what we want to do is we want to do our try catch block. And we want to throw in our Axios call to allow us to be able to get the data that we want. Hold on one second. I'm just going to take my. So far away. Okay. Okay. Good thing I'm in really bad shape. Okay. And I'm out of breath. So, all right. So we're back at our get tasks. So what we want to do is we want to do a try catch block. So I usually like to just kind of set it up like that. So we got a try, and then we got our catch. And just do one of those. So inside of our try block, this is where we're going to have our Axios call. So I like to create a variable, and I like to call it res. That usually stands for like resource. A lot of people like to create something that's called like data or info, but I have found that res is pretty standard across the industry. And whenever you're looking at tutorials and help and like sample projects and whatever online, most people tend to use res. So I'm going to create a variable called res, and then in here I'm going to have my Axios call, and I'm going to place it after await. So the async await basically just tells our browser that this function is going to be an asynchronous function, meaning that computer code is usually run top to bottom. There's a couple exceptions around that. One of those exceptions being when you have an asynchronous function. So this is saying that this is going to be an asynchronous function, and when you see the word await, that is when you want this function and the rest of the page to pause until whatever is after this await returns or fulfills itself. So we're going to say let res equal await, and then we're going to do our Axios dot get. So this is basically going to say don't do anything until your Axios dot get call works and it has pulled all of our information. So we know that we want to do a dot get. The way that we know that is in our controller, we have set up this def index method, and this has some Ruby code inside of it that is going to render JSON data for all of the tasks. So for all of our tasks, they're just those 3 tasks that I set up in my seeds file and then seeded into our Postgres database. So we can see a lot of that information whenever we go to our routes page, and that is at our local host, usually 3000 by default, /rails/info/routes. This is an extremely helpful page that basically allows you to see what URLs your Axios calls need to point to in order to do the function that you want. It also gives you the verb that you need to put after your Axios call. So Axios dot, what verb do you need? Put, post, delete, get, etc. So we're going to be doing tasks index, which we know is going to show us all of our tasks. We look over here. we can see that the verb is get and the URL is /tasks. So that means that we are going to do await Axios.get, as you can see right there, and our URL is going to be /tasks. So that looks pretty good. Now, just to make sure that that works, I'm going to throw in a console log here. I'm going to console log out res. So res should equal the JSON data that we're getting from this Axios call. And this console log should put that JSON data inside of our console just to make sure that it's working. But let's fill out the rest of this really quick. So we're going to do our catch. The catch is basically what happens whenever the async function fails, or the Axios call fails. It'll run down here and run whatever is inside of this catch. We're going to console.log out an error. And we're getting that error from right here. So this looks pretty good to me. So let's go ahead and hit save. Let's do a refresh. And let's see if we can get our JSON data for all of our tasks to show up over here. So click our button. Boom. Okay, there we go. So you can see here, we got res. Res is an object that has, this data here. It has a status text, head. You can see it keeps going. You can expand that. I think if you click I, it'll show the rest of it. What we really want, though, is this data here. So we click data. It's an array of 3 objects. And you can see that this is the info that I put in my seeds file. So it's 3 tasks. It's update LinkedIn profile, it's plan trip, and then DPL homework. And then it also has some due dates there. So that's great. So we know that that's working. We have gotten all of our tasks, and that's awesome. So now we need to do some work with those tasks. So one of the first things that we're going to do is here in our app.js file, which is kind of our parent level file, we're going to create some state. And we're going to do that by using the React useState hook. So we'll do tasks, set tasks equals useState. Now, because this is a hook that is from React, we have to import it from React. So I'm just going to click on here. I'm going to tab for an auto import. You can see it just automatically pulled that in up there. And I'm going to do that. So the way that useState works from just a high level is that state is essentially something that it's basically variables and data and information that we want to remember across our application. There are things that we want to be able to access at various points inside of our application. So this thing, we're doing a to-do app. The information that is our tasks, those 3 tasks, or eventually it'll be more tasks because we can add tasks, we can delete tasks. We're going to want to be able to access those tasks probably all over this app. So we're going to go ahead and create a piece of state for those tasks. useState is just a function that is, it's called a hook, but what that really is just a fancy function that React provides for us to allow it to make that happen. And then you give it 2 examples, not 2 examples, you give it 2 variables, you give it tasks, or you give it the name of whatever the state is. And then you do set, and then starting with a capital letter, the name of whatever you set that state to. So in this case, we have tasks, then set tasks, with tasks starting with capital T. So we now have this, and then we need to set the initial value for this state. That is what you do inside of these parentheses after useState. So in this case, I'm just going to set it as an empty array. It doesn't matter a whole lot, but I do want the data type to be the correct type. We know, looking over here, that our JSON data is an array. So our res.data is an array. We want that to match. It kind of helps keep state, it helps with synchronicity of that. Otherwise, you kind of run into some weird errors. So you always try to keep at least the data type the same. But we're going to set it to be empty. And the reason we're going to set it to be empty is because right down here inside of our Axios call, we're actually going to set tasks to equal res.data. We're going to set tasks equal res.data, which is this array of these 3 objects. So now, as soon as it gets to here, tasks is no longer going to be this empty array. It's going to be this array of 3 objects, which is our tasks. So that should be good. So we've now set our tasks, that's great, but we want to be able to look at our tasks. So the first thing that I think we should do is probably create a new file, and that should be called tasks.js. I've already created a file, but if you're following along, you can create one, or if you're just watching, that's fine. Yeah, we're going to have tasks.js, because what we want to eventually do is down here in our app return, we want to return those tasks, that information. And React works best when you can kind of compartmentalize pieces of code. There's not like a tried and true way to do that. There's a lot of different ways. And kind of how you compartmentalize your code is up to you. But there's usually some like best practices. What I like to do is if I have like a piece of like data or information that is like a type, not an official type, just like a type that I kind of made up, say it's a task, or it's a book, or it's an item. I like to create a React component that is like kind of a compartment that is kind of a plural of that type. So like I like to have, if we're doing tasks, I like to have a tasks.js component. And then I subdivide that further into the singular task.js. And each of those will kind of do a different thing. And we'll go through that right now. But inside of our tasks.js, let's go ahead and just kind of set this up. So we'll do import React from React, and then we're going to do our const task. So I'm just going to set up our just this quick template. We're going to be giving this props, so I'm going to just go ahead and right now just throw props in there because I know that we're going to be receiving some props down the line. I'm going to go ahead and do a return, and then just going to throw in some kind of dummy data here. I'm going to say tasks. We'll call it that. And then we're going to make sure to export default tasks. And that's great. Now, we want to take this component, this tasks.js component, and we want to render that inside of our app.js. So the way to do that is after this to-do list app and after this show me my to-do tasks, we are going to import our tasks component that we just created. So I hit tab, it automatically imports it from the file structure over here. And I'm just going to close that out. Now, if we, let's see, I have some kind of, oh, I know what it is. So you can't have trailing like HTML children inside of JSX. So I almost always just put an empty and closing tag around everything. That usually gets rid of that error for me. It's a little bit cleaner than having just a div around everything. I only like to use divs like, you know, when it's like syntactically appropriate. But yeah, so I got rid of that. So anyways, we have our tasks here, it's imported. So what should happen is we should have to-do list app, we should have our button, and then we should have whatever this component is returning, which if we go there, it's returning a div that says tasks. So let's refresh this, and if all goes well, it should say tasks down here. Boom, there we go. That's awesome. So our app is now rendering some stuff that is inside of a different component, which is super cool. So that's great. So what we really want to do though, is we want to pass some of this information that we just got into our tasks component. And we're going to do that through passing props. So we want to pass these tasks because we're setting tasks here. So tasks are going to equal this data. We want to pass that data into tasks so that instead of saying tasks here, it's going to show the data that we want it to show. So let's go ahead and pass that in. So we'll do tasks. So I'm going to go ahead and name my prop variable there with tasks, and then I'm going to tell it what I'm passing in. And that's going to be tasks. And we'll save that. Pass, perfect. Okay. Now, back in here, we're going to get those tasks from our props. So there's a bunch of ways you can do this. I like to do it this way a lot. It feels clean to me, where I take the prop name, and then you set it equal to props. And what that does is it basically just allows you to use this word now kind of as a variable name throughout your file. So we're going to take tasks. We now are getting this data that we got in our app.js from that Axios.get file. We now have access to that data right here inside of our tasks.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a function here, and you do this a lot in React, is setting up functions that render information, and you then call those render functions inside of your return. The reason you do that is because it's really hard inside of the return to add kind of like programming logic, like if-else statements and that kind of stuff. But you can do it inside of render functions. So we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to create a new function called render tasks. So const render tasks equals that. We'll do an arrow function, and there we go. We know we're going to have a return. We'll go ahead and do that. Great. So what we want to have happen here is we have an array of 3 objects. We want to display each of those objects. So one way to kind of go through an array is to do like a for each or a map. In this case, we're going to go ahead and do a map, but we'll do return task.map. And the reason we're going to do a map over a for each is because for each, you might remember this from previously. It's kind of like one of those first things that you learned, and I like always forget it. It took me forever to remember, but for each actually changes the array that it's working on. .map creates a copy and returns a copy of an array. And that's what we want to do. We don't actually want to change anything. We just want to return a copy. So we're going to do return tasks.map. And we're going to set up our map function. Then we're going to do our return. Great. Now, inside of here, I'm just going to say div task. And this is going to basically make sure that I have an extra return in here. I don't need that. There we go. So we're just going to test that our .map is actually working. So inside of here, instead of doing tasks, let's actually call our render tasks function like that. Cool. So what should happen here is, in fact, we'll do, yeah, we'll say task. Cool. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and refresh this. What should happen is it's going to go through each item inside of our tasks array and do whatever is inside of this return. So what's going to happen is it's going to say task 3 times. So let's go ahead and refresh this. There we go. So it says task 3 times. So that's good. So we're getting close because we have 3 tasks inside of our array, but we want it to show the actual task and not just this word task or this word task. So the way that we're going to do that is, let's go ahead and get rid of that. And we're going to create another new JS file. And it's going to be called task.js. And that is what we're going to pass into this map function. So let's go ahead and go over to task.js really quick. And let's get this set up. This is going to be the individual, like the singular file for like the kind of like type of data that we're trying to get. So to import React, we're going to set up again our component just like normal. We know that we're going to be getting some props down the line. I'm going to go ahead and just put that in there. And then I'm going to give it a return. I'm going to say div. I'm going to say task. And then we're going to export default task. We'll do that. Then over here, we want to import it. So we'll do that. Great. So now if we hit save, so basically I just filled this out. I added in the return the exact same data that we had here. So this just says the word task. So if we refresh this, it should do the exact same thing. The only difference is that we moved the return code that was hard coded here into here. Click that, boom, there we go. So we got our 3 tasks there, so that's great. So we now are to the crucial part where we're going to actually grab that data and display it. So what we're going to do first is, let's see, task, return, let's see, cool, okay. So what we're going to do is inside of our tasks, there's some props that we need to pass this task. So one of the things whenever you're mapping over arrays from JSON data is each individual item needs a unique key. So the first kind of prop we're going to give it is this key, and we're going to say task.id. If you look over here inside of our res.data, you can see that it has like our to-do list item name, it has our to-do list item due date, but it also has this ID. These IDs are created and they're unique to every single item that you create. So we can go ahead and return task key equals task.id. We also want to give it, we're going to spread out over the task. So what this does is this basically gives task.js, this file, as props, all of the properties that are inside of here. So and by properties, I'm talking about the ID number, the name, and the due date. The other thing that we want to give it is, actually, I think that should be good for now. So that's good. So let's go back to our task and let's grab those props from this props tag. So we're going to do const, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did previously. We're going to do, so because we're spreading out over task, this basically breaks apart that piece of data into its individual attributes. And so it breaks it into name, ID, due date, etc. This is where we're going to pull those up. So we're going to say name. We also want due date, and we also want ID. And we're going to equal those to props. Now we have access to these items inside of this file. So now inside of our return, this is where we want to start to give it, give this information to this file for to display on the web page. So we're going to go ahead and grab name. So we want to display the name for the task. We also want to display I don't know, the due date. So we can do we'll make this bold. We'll say due date : and then we'll say we want to pass in the actual due date. So we'll do that. inside of that p tag. Let me just do this real quick. Due date, great. What else do we want? I think that's probably all that we need for right now. So go ahead and hit save. Do we need that ID right now? I don't think that we do, but we will need it later. We'll leave that off for now. All right, so we hit save. Now, if we come back over here and we hit refresh, what should happen is we'll click our button and it should show an H2 tag with the name of each of our tasks and the due date. Let's go ahead and click it. Boom. There's our to-do list. So we've got update LinkedIn profile, we've got plan trip, we've got DPL homework. So that is like the basic get function. It takes a little bit of time to like set up, but it's pretty simple. We have probably about like 10 minutes. So I wanted to see if you guys had a specific CRUD action outside of get or read that you would like me to maybe go over, or if you guys have any questions about this, or if there was some other concept maybe that like going over, we went over this pretty quick, but that kind of like was like, whoosh, like, I don't know what just happened, or you're not sure what's connecting or anything like that.
I'm always up for delete.
Sorry, would you say that one more time?
I said, I'm always up for the delete one, trying to figure that out.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we can definitely do delete. Does that sound helpful for everyone else? Cool. Okay, yeah. So let's go ahead. Let's do delete. So let's just kind of think through it really quick. So we want to be able to delete one of these or all of these if we want to from our app. So ideally, we're going to want to have a delete button for each one of these. So that means that we're going to want to have that delete button inside of this task.js, because this is where each of these is being like kind of rendered. So let's go ahead, let's put a delete button underneath our due date. So we'll do button, and let's see, we'll have it say, we'll do on click equals, let's see, I'm just going to go ahead. So we don't have this function defined yet, but it's going to eventually say delete task. We'll do that. And then we'll say like deleting. So because this is a to-do list, instead of delete, let's say like completed task. So that way, when the task is completed, you click it and it deletes it, but it's kind of like finishing a task, and it'll like go away. Cool. So there's that. So this delete task, we could define this inside of task.js and just run it through here. What I like to do though is I like to try to consolidate what I call like the business logic of my app as much as possible. It kind of helps with organization. It helps me know like, okay, as my app gets bigger, where are all my CRUD actions at? Are they spread out all over my app in different files, or are they all kind of consolidated in one place? So in this case, we're already using our app.js file for this get function. So let's go ahead and use this same file for our delete function. And then we'll pass delete down through props, kind of like a tree all the way down to task. So let's go ahead and set it up. So it'll be just like every other function that we do. We'll do const, and we'll name it. So we'll name it delete task. It's going to be an async function. It's going to be an arrow function. We'll do a try block. Oops. And then, oops, okay, I'm going crazy. Catch, boom. Okay, cool, that works. All right, so for delete task, what we're going to want to do is just like almost always, whenever we do an Axios call, we're going to want to do let res equal await Axios. Okay, so we're going to want to delete. So let's go ahead and go to our route. And we're wanting to delete a task. So we're going to look for our controller method over here that corresponds to that. Here we go, task destroy. our verb is going to be delete, and our URL is this tasks ID. So we know that it's going to be let res equal await Axios dot delete, and then this URL. So it's task slash, and then it's like this ID here. And it's like a colon ID. We want to, what that is really saying is there should be an ID inside of the URL that you're on, or inside of the data that you are basically referencing with this URL. And the way to get to that ID number is you have to interpolate it. So instead of just writing ID, we're actually going to interpolate it like this. So now we are saying we want to delete a task that has this ID number. Then after that, we want to also update our state so that it not only deletes it from our backend inside of our database, but it also deletes it in our state so that it disappears from being like rendering or showing up on our web page. So to do that, we're actually going to do a filter function. So I'm going to create a new variable called let filtered task equal task.filter. And then this is just kind of the setup for a filter function, but you pass it in a variable name. So task to task.id does not equal ID, and we'll do that. So what we're saying is we're basically just filtering out all of the, we're leaving in our, inside of this variable, all of the tasks that do not equal the ID of the task that we just deleted. So in other words, we're pulling out the task that we deleted and we're leaving all of the other ones inside. So the way that we set that inside of our task is we're going to have to run set task and then set it to those tasks, which are just living inside of this variable. So there's that. Then we'll do our catch. So we want to do catch, we'll do error, and then inside of here, we'll do, we'll just console log out this error, console.log error. Sweet. Okay, so there is our like basic delete function. So now we have to get that all the way to here. So we're going to actually do that using props. So we have our tasks. It already has this one prop. We're going to give it another prop. I'm just going to name it the same as that function. So delete task equals delete task. Great. Save that. So that's being passed into tasks. So we go to tasks. We have to pull that off. So we'll pull that off. I think it's just delete task, right? Is that what I said? Delete task. Yeah, cool. So we got to pull that off. Then we have to pass this now into task, which is where it's trying to go. It's like its destination. So we're going to also do pass it again. Task into here, and we're going to pull this off one more time. There we go. So now we have delete task available inside of our task.js file. So we already have our button. We already have it set up so that when you click it, it runs this function. So it goes all the way back and it knows to run this function here, our delete task inside of our app.js. This delete task function, because it's asking for an ID, we're actually going to want to pass in an argument here. We're going to want to pass in an ID number here. This ID here that I just wrote is kind of just like a variable. It's just an argument variable. It doesn't have any data inside of it. I'm just saying, I'm just calling it an ID so that I know what it is down the line. In here, this is where we're going to pass in the actual argument. When we write ID here, it now has a value assigned to it. And that's because it's being pulled off of props from here, because this is destructuring that task into all of its attributes like due date, name, etc., including ID. So now when we have ID here and we use the word or the variable ID, it contains that information. So now what should happen is, if we save this, if I didn't forget something, I don't think I did, but if we save and refresh, when we get all of our tasks, we should now have a button beneath each task that says completed task. Great. And whenever we click it, it should be deleted from our database and from our front end. There we go. So we just clicked it, it was deleted. So now we're good to go. So if we refresh it, it should be gone. We get them again, perfect. So we know that it deleted from the backend because we did a refresh. We did our Axios.get command again, grabbed from the database, and it still isn't there. So it's deleted from both the front end and the backend. Yeah, Matt, was that like helpful? Just kind of go through that again. Do you have any questions, or does anyone else have any questions?
So if you don't have your delete task async, like should that not work if it's not async?
Yes. So yeah, that is a good point. It probably will not work if it's not async. And so it's a little bit complicated about like why these always need to be async. But basically with JavaScript, anytime you are making a call to an API, like with Axios or something else, trying to get data, you need to run that as an asynchronous function. And it's because the speed at which it's able to get information from a database is kind of a variable. It depends on how quickly that database server is running, and you don't want to hold up your entire site, or you want to allow other functions to be able to run while it's working through trying to make that happen. So
okay, so if my delete, like in my case, a delete book seems to be working on both front and back end, I should change it anyways, just for good practice.
most definitely, yeah, because you'll find down the line as you are working with more data sets that it'll start to get confused and you'll run into errors. And so you'll always want to make the API calls, which in our case is always an Axios call, always an async and await function.
Awesome, thanks, man.
Yeah, for sure.
Later.
My two middle fingers disappeared like perfect.